India demonstrated a capability to hit whatever it wanted. Two, it has the will to do it. Indian superiority wasn't just in their capabilities, but it was the integration in real time of all those capabilities. One service being prepared to help the other service and assisting, even in the response to the terrorist attack. Pakistan is a Chinese equipped military, so this is absolutely a test of Chinese military technologies. India achieved strategic goals at a low cost by changing the entire paradigm of the entire region, in my opinion.
Namaste, Jai Hind. Almost all episodes we have filmed in the past 2.5 years have been shot in our Delhi studios. In some episodes, we did shoot in cities outside of our Delhi studios, but the shoots have been in-person interviews. We're making a slight shift now. These episodes are being done live cross with guests who are not in the country or outside of Delhi, hence not in our studio. We're calling it the ANI broadcast. My guest today is John Spencer, warfare scholar and chair of Urban Warfare Studies, Modern War Institute. Mr. Spencer has served over 25 years in the US Army as an infantry soldier. He's author of 3 books, Understanding Urban Warfare, Connected Soldiers, Life, Leadership and Social Connections in Modern Warfare, and the Mini Manual for Urban Defender. Colonel Spencer, thank you so much for being part of the show. I really look forward to having this conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've learned a lot watching your show. I'm a big fan. Sorry I missed you on my trip last week and the week before.
So that's what I'm going to speak to you about your trip to India. You were here and you spoke with top military brass and you spoke with members of the Indian bureaucracy, External Affairs Ministry bureaucrats. And you wrote on X, and I'm quoting you, the operation, which is Operation Sindoor, demonstrated India's shift from a reactive posture to a proactive, precision-oriented doctrine. Do you see India's national security doctrine reshaping post-Operation Sindoor?
Absolutely. And it's still evolving. I know the Prime Minister was just on a multi-country trip. Communicating a strategic doctrine is as important as implementing it. As we talk in military terms of red lines and things, and clearly India demonstrated that with action. But the words matter, the cultural aspect, so it's understood, and that's why it was important to talk to active military, former military, think tanks, media. I can absolutely clearly see a change in India's strategic doctrine that will really change the entire region, in my opinion.
You write, and I quote, the conversations I had covered a wide range of subjects: air power, deterrence, counterterrorism, information warfare, supply chain security, semiconductors, and the future of space and cyber operations. But across all of them was a consistent theme: India's preparing for the next war while working to protect the peace it is building at home. Where and when do you see the next war happening?
So, as somebody who studies war for a living and been doing it for a long time, is that war is always uncertain, political, human. You can't predict the triggering moment of the next war, right? You can definitely identify the underlying current or the underlying issues that persist, and that includes within yourself. So this was the underlying conditions within India, which is a pattern of response to, cross-border terrorism, led to a formation of a doctrine that an enemy takes advantage of. Nobody can predict the future, but one of the ways you prevent future wars is this preparation and change and being on the ground. This was why studying Operation Sindoor wasn't just about the 4 days. It was what was happening the decade before, the 5 years before, from making India to the Indian military transformations and preparations, the small business innovations that are going on with the technologies, so many elements that were preventing and leading to being prepared for a war. I can't tell you when the next one is because the enemy always gets a vote. I can tell you that India is more prepared. And from what I'm hearing on the ground is that they're not resting on what they just did. And it was that was in a path that the priority is development to strengthen the nation as a whole. while you also strengthen your deterrence, your red lines, your capabilities. So you do have military overmatch, which is deterrence. I hope there's not another war. I know as a student of war as well is that only the dead have seen the end of war, and there are many actors in the region who are trying to fulfill their strategy for the next war. So you prepare, you deter, and you continue to evolve like India is doing.
Right. I don't know whether you saw this because you were, I guess you were traveling from India to the US, but the Deputy Chief of Indian Army Staff, he said that Operation Sindoor, India wasn't just fighting one adversary. I don't want to term it as enemy because it wasn't a state of war, it was a conflict, but said that, there were three adversaries. It was China, it was Pakistan, and there was Turkey. Now, what happened was that in this 3 day war, if I want to say, or a conflict, or whatever it is to be termed, weapon systems were being used like a laboratory. Now, General Asim Munir, of course, denied this, that it wasn't a three-front war that happened, and there was nothing of this sort. What is your view on this? Was it really India fighting three adversaries at one go in those 3 days?
So absolutely, I saw those comments and I agree with them. There is some nuances for somebody who doesn't study war of proxy warfare. Clearly, Pakistan is a Chinese equipped military, so this is absolutely a test of Chinese military technologies, both for the rest of the world, but also for China. So it does use it as a lab of its technologies, and it will make changes. But you're right. I mean, India does share a border with China. Turkey does provide capabilities to Pakistan. I agreed with the comments. There are a lot of nuances there, even from a geopolitical perspective of China or any adversary to India using Pakistan and the borders to isolate India economically, militarily, in all aspects. There is a difference between a war, a named operation like Sindoor, which was a response to a terrorist attack that had a clear start and a clear ending, and this broader kind of state of conflict where nation states are trying to weaken what they view as threats, weaken their neighbors, which is unfortunate. I agree with those statements. A lot of nuances there, but absolutely a test of those technologies. There is an element of proxy warfare where it's kind of geopolitically, that's, who has a military defense agreement with whom and what's the extent of it. But absolutely, this was a test of Indian indigenous systems versus Chinese systems. And everybody was learning from that demonstration because war puts everything to the test.
You're an infantry officer, but I'm throwing a curveball at you. I'm going to talk to you about the Navy, right? I just want to know that, in there was a lot of talk about air power being used, and drones that were used. Let me talk to you about the Pakistan Navy. Why did the ships not leave the port? During Operation Sindoor, why do you think there wasn't much of action that you saw? And what happened to those Chinese frigates which have been docked out there? They haven't left the harbor. What happened there?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you're right. Although I was an infantryman, I do try to study. Even Sindoor isn't a story just about the Air Force. So much of the Army, I gravitate to that. I did watch the Pakistan military briefing about their naval operations, and supposedly that was a deterrence. It's part of the story that still has to be written. I believe personally that the Indian Navy has progressed to a point where it has achieved a deterrence, and that makes it hard to determine, okay, why didn't something happen on the Pakistan side, those frigates, what's going on? That makes it hard to tell when you don't know where the line is of somebody is being deterred or there's something else going on. That's a part that I'm still doing my research, but I will say strongly that this whole operation's success of military dominance was only achieved through that integration. And when the DGS and the DGOs all had that briefing, you could tell that that was a part of Indian superiority. It wasn't just in their capabilities, but it was the integration in real time of all those capabilities. One service being prepared to help the other service and assisting, even in the response to the terrorist attack. I learned that 7 of the 9 terrorist locations were struck with Army capabilities, not Air Force. Not to say that one's better, but it is through that joint integration. But it's a great question that needs to be answered for sure.
Look, scholars like you are going to study this war and see the weapon systems which were used, what was successful, what wasn't, why, etc. Right? This is going to be some deep dive into it. I just wanted to know that if the Chinese weapon systems didn't work, their radars, their interception, if they didn't work, the drones, if they didn't work, do you see Pakistan shopping for stuff outside of China?
Absolutely. I mean, you would think we put rational actor theories like if what you bought doesn't work, then you go back to the seller and say this didn't work like it was supposed to. But you also don't know if it was user error. But absolutely, they're going to try to identify all of their weaknesses and look towards what. But they have a money problem, right? So the IMF has to bail Pakistan out. So can they get cheap, and then they also want advanced, superior technologies. Is a challenge for Pakistan and some other nations, but they'll definitely be looking at to integrate. This is again where the proof is in the evidence. I have a strong in my research, in God I trust, all others bring evidence. And for the military capabilities, the evidence was in that video satellite footage, not in the words about how you said your Chinese system performed, but where's the evidence?
Look, General Munir, Asif Munir was in DC, and now the Pakistan Air Force chief was there. What is his wish list? What do you think is his wish list? At least
Oh,
the Pakistani Air Force.
I'm sure the Pakistan military would love U.S. technologies. I think there's I always get this question. I'm sure you didn't ask it, but I'm sure like, why does the United States have this? Why is he having lunch, and why is this general saying this statement? I know it's a big, and I got it every day while I was in India. I don't do politics. I do war, which is politics by other means. I know that relationship is complex. I don't think you'll see any U.S. technology going there soon, and they'll have to be looking other places. Although there's the history with the F-16, multiple presidents there, limitations on how they can use it, things like that. I always say geopolitics is complex, but terrorism should not be. And the United States makes statements and through action, especially this administration, that we will not back those who back terrorism.
You've read, there have been several articles about this, of course, after General Asim Munir was in DC, as to what changed between 2018 President Trump and 2025 President Trump. When he spoke then about Pakistan providing safe haven for terrorists, and now what has changed when he's so pally with General Asim Munir. And he said that what America got was nothing but lies and deceit. And now it's like, oh, we are so chummy. What happened? What is the difference? Is it just Iran? Is that it? Or is it because of the Russia war? What is it? What makes Pakistan so indispensable to every US dispensation?
Again, complex. The world has changed. I mean, the world has changed from the president's first administration to now. The Middle East, terrorism, the rise of many countries, and these wars. If you look at October 7th, the awful terrorist attack, Pahalgam and Operation Sindoor, now the Iran, Israel, U.S. operations. There has been a geopolitical giant earthquake to the old status quo. And a lot of people are giving a lot of credit to one meeting. Okay, fine. Look at the actions, not the words. Foreign policy, unraveling foreign policy. There is shared. I mean, ISIS-K and other terrorist organizations, and I know the double game. There is no black and white answer. The United States, of course, has geopolitical interest, economic. Not this is why I'm hopeful for the Indian trade agreements, Indian U.S. military agreements, all of that, strengthening that partnership rather than talking about old partnerships about one meeting. But the world is different, and I think the fracturing of ties to those who support terrorism is definitely clear and present.
Look, you talk about major changes, upheavals, even earthquake, as you say, which have happened in the past 2 years, 3 years actually now, in the global sphere. Then foreign policy has to be dynamic, right? It has to change with the changing dynamics. But it's like this is now going back to the 80s when you're hyphenating, or when America is hyphenating India, Pakistan all over again. And this is that Cold War era strategy literally happening all over again in the Indian subcontinent. So is it that I don't want to sound very pessimistic, but it's really, to Indians, it sounds like, oh my God, America's going back to its old playbook. Is that what's happening? Do you see that too?
No, not at all. Again, the world, this is where it's hard to understand war without understanding geopolitical, international relations, political sciences, even economic ties, to understand the fact that India is not the same India of 5 years ago. For me, studying India from every element of economic, military, political, the same thing for the United States. So the threats to the world are different, right? I think one of the threats is just the geopolitical global international order. When you have things like the Russia-Ukraine war, you have the uselessness of the United Nations, in my own words. These aspects that make it a different paradigm than to go back to the Cold War, and the relationships and opportunities between the United States and India are much different than they were, just from a geo-connected or a globally connected economy. The data, artificial intelligence, all of the innovations coming out of India, how it will impact the world, let alone the United States. And I think that there's more opportunity than there ever was during the Cold War, in my own opinion.
Let me move back to Operation Sindoor from policy issues. You would have, I want to talk to you about the Noor Khan Airbase. You would have read Pakistani security analyst Imtiaz Gul. Now, he claims that this airbase was strategically significant and under de facto American operational control, he says. And there was a covert arrangement with the Americans, and that their aircraft that is American aircraft used to land, and, in Pakistani generals couldn't even go there, and Pakistani senior military officials, including Pakistan Air Force officials, they were restricted from accessing certain areas in Noor Khan Air Base. Now, is that the reason why America suddenly got active and wanted this war, so-called war, to end immediately? Because 24 hours earlier, they said, this is not our game, this is not us. And then when these air bases get bombed, suddenly they get in. The ostensible reason is that, oh, okay, two nuclear nations. But two nuclear nations was the case 24 hours before that. And then 24 hours later, after Noor Khan goes away in flames, or a part of it at least, suddenly America gets active. So what exactly is in that airbase?
So I only do unclassified research. So I learn more from your show than I do often from being on the ground. I mean, some of the people that you interview. So it's amazing. You're right. The vice president's comments, and again, understanding the American changes in foreign policy, uh, as Operation Sindoor was escalated by Pakistan. Of course, many countries, to include the United States, wanted to see that escalation stop because of how catastrophic it could be. But every strike, to include Nuristan, Mariki, others, that India sent a message with each one of those. Now, you have asked Indian leadership, military and civil military, exactly what were some of those messages. So that's for them to answer. But I can, as a military guy, I can say that that spot was hit to send a message about capability, as much so as it was for the actual evidence of a destruction. India demonstrated a capability to hit whatever it wanted with strategic leadership too. So even if it hits a spot, even if what you just said is true, and I don't know, it demonstrated that, one, it can do it, two, it has the will to do it, but also it was restrained. And even all the places they hit, the amount of destruction, the precision guided munitions that they used was a sign, a signal, rather than a destructive act, right? Because people think that war is about destroying everything. War is a contest of will. India was demonstrating will to do what's necessary if Pakistan wanted to continue to escalate. And that's strategic independence and strategic, basically, leadership. The United States, of course, was concerned, I'm sure, and again, I don't know, about not wanting something to escalate beyond what it was. And that's why initially responding to terrorism, the sovereignty of every nation to respond to being attacked, and especially how restrained India was, is important to say like that has nothing to do with it. I understand the politics even within India for the United States to say that they did something called or did something like that. I understand that. I look through it as a military lens. You're right, that strike was very unique. I think it was sending a message about capability to hit anything it wanted in India or in Pakistan, but also the will to do it.
Look, you've been military advisor. You get that there are things which are military objectives which have to be done, and then there is perception. You met with several media personnel when you were here, think tanks, and there are many who feel that maybe the military objectives were met, but there's a level of dissatisfaction among many people that it should have just continued for a couple of days more, leveled those air bases, leveled the terror factories, maybe got back Pakistan occupied Kashmir, expand the area of activity. Tell me, as a military man, as a military scholar, how do you manage, how do military planners manage perception and military goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's more on the actually, and this is for democracies why it's so hard. For Pakistan, it's not, right? They can say what they want and they don't care if they have legitimacy, credibility, authority, that they control it. And a democracy is really complex, especially which is I think the best is civilian leadership of the military. I can argue with four-star generals, and I do all the time, or defense secretaries even about okay, what was the political goal established by the political leadership? Was that achieved objectively? And I can say, looking at Operation Sindoor, objectively, the political goal, which was limited, and this is where you get into the escalation dominance. If you want to go beyond achieving that limited goal, which on this one, for the amount of price that India paid, and although every life is important, the accomplishments are generational. We'll see on how long it lasts, but I try to marry the conversation by even if I'm talking to a very military person or a very kind of within the population who doesn't really understand the nuances, is remind people of what the objective of a war is. And in this case, you look towards political leadership. Okay, what did they say the objectives were each step of the way? And this is again why Operation Sindoor fascinates me so much, is how much communication was happening from the leadership, the civilian leadership, the prime minister and minister of external affairs and others, and the military, same sheet of music, daily communication to achieve a limited goal that was for Pakistan, that was for external audiences, and it was even for the Indian people to understand. There's always the outsiders that think that they could have changed history by doing something else. They just don't know the second and third order effects of had a decision to go farther, do more, had been taking. And this is where I don't do kind of revisionist history, or I don't try to war game. I try to look at what happened. In this case, it is conclusive that India achieved strategic goals at a low cost, but changing the entire paradigm of the entire region, in my opinion.
You spoke about comms, so I'm going to end the conversation on comms, ask you this last question. You've authored several books, you understand about communication so well. Do you think that India communicated properly to the world, effectively? Because there are many who feel that Pakistan is always one step ahead of India as far as communication is concerned. They bombard the airwaves with their point of view. They did that in earlier operations as well. And even here, they were more proactive, whereas India is hesitant in admitting there's this strategic ambiguity. You were asking me whether we know more on the ground. Believe me, it was very hard to get information. There were regular press interactions, yes, but India has always been a little resistant when it comes to sharing of information during active operations, and one saw that happening this time too. Is that beneficial? Do you think that worked this time, or does India need to get its act together? It needs to better its act.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a big part of my study and continues to be, is that kind of the narrative warfare, the information operations, as we call it, aspect. Of course, India everybody can always do something better. But I view, and this is what part of my study will be, how many times did India communicate? What did they communicate? And the fact that and it is unique as somebody who studies war for a military to have a press conference with that level of intelligence revealed, as in the videos, the satellite imagery, the exact locations. Of course, democracies want 100% transparency for operational security, for other reasons. There's reasons why you can't have 100% clarity. On the Pakistan side, you saw trying to put out information with zero evidence, and you saw like social media that I live in, people eating them alive, basically meme warfare and things because of the statements they were making without the credibility. But you did have international media believing some of the lies, and to where which is really unique and part of my study is how did the story of supposedly knocking down so many Indian aircraft become such a global story when that's like the trees through the woods. I mean, there's so many reasons why that would happen, and it has nothing. There's a much larger story here of military dominance, strategic change in approach, so many other stories. So there's lessons here for the information operations. You're right. I believe that India navigated that very uniquely, and part of my study is how much they communicated and what did they show. You always want to keep things internal, of course. There are lessons you want to learn within yourselves, but the ideal that India would have 100% transport. I don't work in the media, so I would understand why media would be frustrated. But I've worked in other parts of the world where there is zero communication, and I mean zero, which makes it even harder to, even in democracy, to say, "Oh, what's happening? What's going on?" It's a fine line to balance. Of course, there's lessons there to be learning, like fighting. When you see a story going viral, you have to fight that, and that's an issue with governments. Really are challenged that they want to be proactive, not reactive, but you have to do both.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, John Spencer. I look forward to having you in our studio next time.
Absolutely, we will make it happen.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening to this edition of the ANI broadcast. Namaste. Jai Hind.